Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of the Hyperion Cleantech Group and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Now, next week, I shall be doing something slightly different. I'm flying off to Prague for an event with Innovant Capital, and I have the opportunity to interview a founder of not one, but two unicorns, Yuri Levine, and also author of a book, Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution. So looking forward to that. And will be a slightly different format. But this week, again, maybe slightly different. Got a guest for you who's also an author, entrepreneur, executive coach, and many things, Zena Everett. Zena, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, David.
It's good to see you. Shame we couldn't do this face-to-face. Zena and I have known each other for a reasonable while. Zena, perhaps if you could share a little bit of your journey, because as you said, you have been an entrepreneur, you've built and sold a business, you're an executive coach, you're a keynote speaker, you're an author. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how you've come to be where you are right now.
Yeah, well, I always think that careers are just leaps from one patch of safe ground to another. So I worked in recruitment. I had a recruitment business, and I became really interested in why some people are more successful than others. And that's a whole topic in itself, actually. So why are some people more successful than others? So I sold my business to my partner. I did a master's in organizational psychology. I spent a fortune then on other leadership and executive psychological coaching training. Yep. I kind of realized that some people are more successful than others because actually they have a plan and they make that plan, and maybe that's the key to success. Okay. So I was happy working in that for a bit. And then I realized actually some of my clients may have a great plan, but what they do all day does not reflect that plan and their priorities. Right. So I became really interested in productivity and efficiency, which might make you chortle a bit as you know me, to think, really? Seriously, this woman's got a nerve. But I became really interested in crazy busyness, and you must see people all the time that fly into the room for a meeting and they're dropping their stuff everywhere and they're not prepared, and, and they've got their head in the weeds. So I became really interested in that, and I wrote my book, The Crazy Busy Cure. So I think that's the area I'm at now. I'm interested in leadership and leadership behaviors, but particularly how some of us manage to achieve priorities and build businesses like you've done, and others are still writing 10-page to-do lists and not doing any of them.
The ghastly
to-do list. That's
right.
That's the patch of safe ground I'm on at the moment.
Right. And it's been a journey, and the books are great, and we'll obviously pass links to them on the episode page for the podcast. But let's dive into some of those areas and why some entrepreneurs succeed better than others, some of the challenges they face, some of the perhaps experiences that you and I have that can be useful to them. Where would you like to start?
Well, with you. You tell me. What have you? Because you managed to build a successful business you're doing recruitment, which you love, and you're in a sector that means a lot to you. And I did do some snooping around, and I see that you're actually giving a lot back as well as just contributing to the sector in terms of the quality of the talent that you put in. But what have you learned about growing a business, David? Because you're also managing remote teams, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you manage to maintain that culture and stay successful? So over to you. See what I did there?
You flipped it around. I think it's incredibly important, and it's been challenging. I'm blessed because on a day-to-day basis, I get to work with so many entrepreneurs and hear their stories and trials and tribulations. And then again on the podcast, I think this is now 112th episode or such, and the majority of those people have been entrepreneurs, and most are willing to share a little bit of their trials and tribulations. But I think certainly in terms of culture, I don't think it's ever been more important. And of course, it always has been important, and it's important whether your business is 100,000 people or two people. But I think for startups in the present age, the culture of a business really is the make or break that's going to get you to achieve whatever your ambitions are.
Yeah. Tell us more about your culture then.
Well, We very early on sat down, and obviously the people I hired initially were people that invariably I knew and had worked with me before. So I knew that we had values that were aligned. But very early, as we started to build and recruit into the team, we sat down and did a number of workshops, actually, and created what we termed a manifesto, essentially. So we wanted to do more than just a mission statement on the wall. We want it to be actually a living and breathing document. And we created a manifesto, which I'm happy to share around, and people can find on our website, actually, which is pretty detailed around our core values around, obviously, no planet B. Clearly, we're very motivated around driving the transition to a cleaner environment, but also a better society. So there's stuff around there about equality, egalitarianism, how we treat people, how we look at diversity and inclusion, all these kinds of things. And it's a document which is really central. And the key thing which I think that's relevant is lots of founders start with an idea or with very clear values. Where they often fall down, in my experience, is as the companies grow, they either assume everybody knows it and has the same values, or they struggle to articulate it as they scale. And particularly if you're in hypergrowth, where you might be 2 people, and literally 20 people 3 months down the line and 200 people a year down the line, that's really challenging. But I think that's really the biggest learning point I've come across is how to communicate as you scale the core values of the business.
Yeah. And, all that stuff, it sounds so obvious to you. But you're dead right. So many people don't do it, do they? Because it's so clear in their head what they're working towards. But then you, as the organization scales, you're dead right. You walk around the business and say, what are your values? And I actually do this for a living. Yeah. And it does make me laugh because people say integrity, sustainability, curiosity. And there's another one. Yeah. And then you say, well, what does that actually mean? Like how you manage your people, what does that actually mean? If kindness is a value, if you're not actually asking people how they are, how they're getting on, what do they need from you? That's not very kind, is it? Well, you're not giving feedback. That's not kind either. Yeah. And they're like, well, look, it's on the wall in reception. And they often say, we've spent ages working on that stuff, so we don't even want to look at it again.
I spent a lot of money on it.
Funny enough, does that sound right? Yeah, we spent whole workshops on the Zena. We had consulting people in who were way more expensive than you, so we're not even going to look at it. And I am working with a CEO who had a list of values that spelt something out. So I can't even remember what they were. Right. And she's changed it to actually brave. That's all the time she's saying when they've got a customer they need to have a challenging conversation and somebody says, should we do A or B? She just says to them, what's the brave thing to do? And they go, oh yeah, okay. So you're spot on. Yeah. You're spot on. And also, I'm talking too much now because I did promise this is all about you, but you know what I'm like. But I think also, particularly our sector, you're in selection. I'm come from that as well. It used to be a lot about making money. Mm-hmm. You have to bang your head on a wall and say to people, that's not motivating. Like just bill more than everybody else is not motivating because ultimately that doesn't inspire people, does it?
No.
So
to a degree, it encourages behaviors which aren't consistent with a lot of the values that companies espouse, I think. Clearly I'm a salesperson and proud of it, and most of my career has been in and around sales and business development. I think you can do that. Well, I know for a fact you can do that in a very ethical way, but if it's certain rewards encourage certain behaviors which aren't necessarily congruent with values. One of the other things I was just talking about, Vena, is around values. A lot of companies I've seen are very much around how can we push this into the marketplace? How can we be seen to, and not in the sense of in any sort of try it fashion. They generally believe and have these values, but they're very keen to push them out. But what they don't necessarily always do is live them internally. And I think that causes a number of companies issues where if you don't live them internally, you as the founders aren't speaking to every client, every supplier, every employee, every touch point with the company. And if those within your company don't live and breathe by the same values, it kind of becomes fairly meaningless, the ones that you espouse.
Yeah. And so for you then, that is the bedrock of a culture, is having a real values and playbook that you translate into all the behaviors.
Yeah, you know what? I think as an entrepreneur, and particularly in our sector in clean tech, things are moving so fast, and there's always opportunities, and there's always these shiny things that come along. And I think if you
Yeah,
don't have a very clear North Star,
you
it's
did
very
right.
easy
Yeah.
to start to become unfocused or actually start to chase things which aren't necessarily hideously evil, but aren't necessarily in line with your values either. So I think for me, it's around really having those core values, that North Star to start with. And then going back to your sort of the brave comment, in the future, if someone says, should we work with this client or should we not? Or should we take on this project or should we not? I said, look at the manifesto. There's your answer.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. So that's my whole crazy busyness. If there isn't that, that's you're reinventing the wheel every single day, and it's time consuming. And I think also the values and that clear mission statement of what we're all about means that you can eliminate a lot of so-called priorities that are just pet projects that are
Yeah.
getting in the way of those big organizational priorities. So when I see people who are chasing their tails and, they're working super hard because
Yeah.
everybody is working super, super hard, but they're chasing their tails a little bit, it's because actually the organization's mission isn't crystal clear. Then consequently, their own contribution isn't crystal clear. So they don't quite know what a good job is. So therefore, they spend loads of time doing everything just in the hope that one of them will kind of, suffice as a good enough job. So those things, but I mean, years and years ago, when you and I were very young, we probably would have thought, oh God, mission statement, values, like, oh please, let's just put as many people as we can in jobs. But it's not like that anymore, is it? It's just simply not.
It hasn't
It's for
been.
all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, no, there are still obviously, one or two companies that live that way, but I think broadly not. And I think broadly, we've evolved since the 1980s or 90s in terms of those mindsets. I think picking back on one of the things that's really important is clarity, for internally and externally. And I think it surprises people where I often talk about how can you not lose talent, because clearly as a company that provides talent, the obvious thing would be that you'd want them to lose talent so you find it for them. But we talk a lot around not losing talent or retaining talent, and one of the key things, as you'll know, amongst many that get people to stick with an organization rather than to look for greener grass, is just having a real sense of clarity. Obviously a sense of that you agree with the values, but actually knowing what they are, not just the values, but the direction of travel, being transparent and being very clear with all of your employees is a surefire way to make sure more of them stick with you through the tough times than where they're kind of second guessing, or worse still, where you're flip-flopping. And if you don't yourself as an entrepreneur or founder have a very clear sense of direction, and you're yourself flip-flopping, that's a surefire way to lose people.
Yeah, yeah. But it's hard, isn't it? Because say you're an entrepreneur in your sector, you've got a great idea, you're doing all those things to get it off the ground, and you're getting funding, and you're worried about your competition, all that kind of stuff. And then you've got to be, you've got to be really strongly good at your job, very analytical, all those things. And then you've got to have this massive amount of emotional intelligence as well.
Yeah.
And that's rare, isn't it?
I think it is. I mean, I'm blessed. We get to pick and choose who we work with. And broadly speaking, most people in our sector are there for the right reasons. Money's the secondary purpose rather than the primary, more often than not. And that makes life much better. And therefore, you do come across people who probably have a clearer sense of those sort of values that they want for their organization. But no, it is really tough when there are a million things that you need to do. And that's flipping back to the book and your studies around how leadership teams or leaders, CEOs can be more productive. More often, I think it is exactly that. We're also busy. When you're building a team, we've already touched on your fundraising, your product developing, you're trying to scale the team, you're talking to investors, you're going to trade shows. There's a million things going on at any given time. I've got a few ideas and a few things I've learned recently, and also from others. But from your experiences, what are some of the key steps that leaders can do to actually get that helicopter view rather than being just in the weeds all the time?
Well, it's called in the textbooks, it's called Enquiry-driven leadership. You and I might call it just having a really good, strong team around you and letting them do their job.
Yeah.
So I think what you've said is exactly right. You're the leader. it's you bring people with you, but you've got to set the North Star and you've got to set the standards. This is what we do around here. This is the values. This is the performance standards I accept. And I think people really want that structure and they want that clarity. You're inviting them to share in the ideas and the concepts, but ultimately you're the custodian of the standards and the values. But then after that, you've got really strong people around you and you've got experts. And I spend most of my life putting myself out on a job and getting the leaders to stop telling people what to do and instead asking questions. So you're basically teaching them to coach. So instead of feeling you need to be the expert in the room, you realize you don't actually. You said it, a high performing team around you. They're the experts, but you are there to facilitate their thinking. And I think that's a real big challenge. And it's a big transition because, you didn't get to where you are today by just thinking, oh, I'll let them do it and hopefully they'll do a good enough job. I'm sure you've had to go through a bit of transition because most entrepreneurs do in letting go of the ropes a little bit and saying, rather than just saying, do this, do this, do this in a very charming way, but nevertheless. And I think that's very tough. So we call it inquiry-driven leadership, but fundamentally it's being a lot more coach-like and there to think, I've set the standards, but ultimately these people are responsible for delivering them. And you can either have one person telling everybody what to do, or you can scale it right up and have all these great minds thinking for themselves, but we're pulling the same direction. I nearly said rowing the boat. I wish I'd written that book, but it's such a good metaphor, isn't it?
It is.
I'm there to make sure they're all rowing in the right direction, but they're doing their own performing standards or something. I think it's really hard now when we're not all in the same room together. And how do you manage that? Because you've got people all over the place, haven't you? And they're certainly not sitting with you every day.
Yeah, in some ways it's actually, I won't say easier, but once you accept that the importance of managing and giving freedom and trust to people, I think that's the key thing in any business, whether you're remote or otherwise. It's around trust. Clearly, there's more trust required when people are remote or hybrid. And the trust is more, I think, reciprocated when it's obviously the case that they've been allowed to work from home or from the beach or from wherever they might happen to be. But I think as a leader, in some regards, because you're not with those people all the time, I found that really beneficial, because when you are in an office and then invariably there's always a knock on the door, whether it's real or metaphorical, people always want some of your time. That doesn't help you to think clearly or to communicate, because you're always on the go. So I think having a remote team where you have specific opportunities to talk and to meet, I think from my experience, I've been just much more deliberate about the conversations and much more deliberate about the messages and the communications that you send, rather than just being constantly throwing out things because you're surrounded by people and things come to your mind. I think that's sometimes that for a lot of entrepreneurs I've spoken to, because our minds are always thinking of 100 million things, sometimes you just speak them, but if there's nobody around, there's no harm done, because you can then filter it a little bit yourself before you start talking to everybody else about it. But certainly I think as a leader managing remote and hybrid teams, really being much more considered around the communications that you have and what you say and how you say it, because it is, it's more concise. You have less time to talk to them, so it needs to be more important, needs to be more clear.
So it sounds like you're with somebody and you have kind of much more intentional, maybe almost an informal conversation with them that's more relaxed and more time. I very rarely hear that. That's really lovely to hear, actually.
Yeah, I think it's around, as all things are, having the right team on board in the first place, and maybe we can touch on that. But how finding and hiring and keeping the right people is fundamental to it. But absolutely, as a leader, having that considered time, and I wrote a blog about this recently. It was around things like company retreats, which for us, it's not just about it's not a retreat, if you like. It's not about just going away and getting drunk and stuff. We do obviously social stuff and hikes and walks and have a few drinks, but it's more about just quality time, get to know each other totally informally, and everybody in the company is totally peer to peer, regardless of what their function is. And we've only done it, I guess, 3 or 4 times now since we started implementing it. But the value to me as the leader, and the value from what I've seen around the team and the feedback we get is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Just from spending those 2 or 3 days together. It's not contrived. It's not all that's going to do. I don't know, let's all go and build a raft on a lake and something, and someone's going to tell us how to do it. Not all that kind of stuff that we've seen in the past. Not saying there's anything wrong with that. There's a place, I guess, for that sort of stuff as well. But for us, it was more just really just connecting.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I often hear leaders say, oh, God, I had a one-to-one. And I say to David, so David, and it's all, formal. And they say, Dave, how are you? And you go, yeah, great. Everything all right? Are the plans clear? Yep. And they get nothing out of it. It's not quite that bad, but they get nothing out of it. I say, well, I know you had a meeting with your client last week and you're on a long train journey. Did you talk then? No, because our one-to-one was the following Wednesday thing. Whereas what you're saying, it sounds like I'm sure you do your formal stuff, but actually you get to know people and you talk and they feel safe and they get all the ideas out. I think sometimes that's missing. So I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet actually about this one-to-one culture where people waste so much time on having these sort of dead, dry, airless one-to-ones where they get nothing. And they're not building relationships, but actually they're asking all the wrong questions. Whereas if they were just in the course of doing something, well, I suppose it's like kids, isn't it? You find out far more from your kids when you're dropping them off somewhere in the car than you ever do if you sit down and say, so how's school?
That's
and it's the same with all of us, isn't it? So stop those one-to-ones, just do stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really challenging, and good to get your take on this. I've worked in a corporate. I worked in a head office that was 750 people in just one head office, and learned a lot. But I really have a dislike of corporate culture, which is probably why I'm unemployable and started my own company. But a lot of, going back to your point, a lot of that is around structure and formality, and it becomes functional rather than useful.
Yeah.
And I think my concern in talking to the companies that we help scale, because obviously we do want our startups, and many do end up with many thousands of employees during the time that we work with them. But notwithstanding, of course, you have to layer some form of HR processes and policies, and have to have procedures. You have to implement that as you start to scale. But they shouldn't start to be the aim. And it seems that often in corporate cultures, it's the mechanics are more important than actually what should be the objective. And the objective should be, is that individual supported, trained, happy, productive, not from a grilling them and looking for statistics, but from having a conversation and having that emotional intelligence to be able to say, actually, we can do more with this individual, or that individual needs more support here, or they're in the wrong place, or we need to get rid of them, or we need these are people we really don't need to want to get rid of. And that comes from not from formal 360s and some sort of reporting lines. It comes from conversations. And I think as a leader in CO, and it's tough when you start to get lots of people. It's easy when there's a half a dozen of you or a dozen of you. When there's 50 of you, it's really more difficult. As I've experienced, I've managed those types of companies before. It's difficult to maintain that, but I think it's so important to try.
Yeah. Well, it's all about saying why, isn't it? Why are we actually doing this? Just because we do things around here? And I know exactly what you mean. And you must see organisations that have no real, it's all seat of the pants and exciting and brilliant. You've probably gone through this transition yourselves. And then you think, oh, hold on, actually, we're just reinventing ourselves all the time here. So we need some processes and structure and framework, because we can't have everybody going off in different directions because it's taking up too much time. And then I think often what happens, that organizations think, right, we need to put back some of that entrepreneurial flair, actually. We need to build high performing units, but maybe look at what's best for that team as opposed to just across the business. Yeah. But you need smart people. And again, it goes back to values, isn't it? Thinking, why are we doing this? Is this the best use of my time? And, there's all sorts of crazy bureaucracies, aren't there? Yeah. When they just get so big and people aren't thinking. And then what I've noticed is people spend ages managing upwards. Mm-hmm. So, and that is a big transition in corporate culture, which hopefully won't affect your client base. But is that I work with people in some great big organizations, and if they're not spending good 40% of their time managing upwards, stakeholder engagement, bringing people with them, working out who to influence, advocating for their team and all that stuff, they're going to be toast, frankly. So when people come from more entrepreneurial cultures, they go in there, they hit the ground running, they try and make an impact fairly quickly. And actually, then they need people like me to say, stop, you're doing this wrong. You've got to, it's a completely different ball game. So you're right. Maybe we all want somewhere in the middle. But I think, actually, David, though, there is also something about the entrepreneur not being a hero.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think I was going to touch on that actually, but I think one of the biggest challenges that I found, and I know it's been echoed with a number of people I've spoken with either on the podcast or day to day, it's really difficult to let go. It's also really difficult for me. I was brought up, whatever you want to call it, Protestant work ethic. I would outwork everybody, and that would be,
absolutely,
that would be it.
Yeah.
And then you get to a point in a leadership function where actually the work, or the busyness at least, is counterproductive. And that's I found that really, really tough to be able to say the next Tuesday, I'm not going to make a phone call. I'm not going to, do X, Y, and Z or chase anything going on. I'm just going to sit and think about this problem that we've got at the moment.
Yeah.
And for quite a while, I just felt after 15 minutes I'm being lazy. It was an internal. It was my problem, not anybody else's. And I'm sure I'd be interested to get your thoughts. I know a number of other founders I've spoken to have found the same thing. But that, going back to the busyness, it's so comforting to be busy, and it's comforting to be the hero as the founder. And neither of those things are very good for the business or for your employees.
No. So Marshall Goldsmith wrote that book called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." Mm-hmm. And he's dead right. And it's a leadership transition. And I find with clients that they hit the skids a bit when they're managing other functions, as you do. So nobody will know more about finding talent than you will do in your business. But you've got other functions now. And that's quite hard to think, actually, I'm no longer the smartest one in the room. I don't know what this finance director actually does, but I need to figure out how we can work together and all those kinds of things. So that is a big transition, is managing other functions. Mm-hmm. And then also thinking, actually, that towering strength that got me in this situation that I'm in, I work harder than everybody else because that's the message that I internalized, is exactly what will then, when it goes into overdrive, will be your biggest problem.
Yeah.
So, and you're absolutely right. Many of us were hardwired to people please, to definitely to work harder, to be perfect. Like nothing's ever good enough. So more. This quarter's fine, but next quarter needs to be better. And then you have to realize we can't please everybody. And in terms of productivity and prioritization, less is more.
Yeah.
So, and that's my whole interest in crazy busyness. And I can be guilty of that. I love a to-do list. I'll cross anything off the to-do list, but my brain can't tell the difference between, go around the kitchen with a damp cloth or actually write my business plan or something. So you can just fool yourself that you're busy.
Yeah.
And I get this. I say to clients, I do these group sessions, and I say, what is the priority that you want to do this year that would have a domino effect on everything else? And if you did that, you wouldn't have to do priorities 2 to 5. So they've all got one. Sometimes they've got half a dozen. You have to say, let me just repeat the question. They say, well, how much time do you spend on that? And if they've understood the question, David, and they've got a big enough role, they will say, less than 5%. Less than 5% goes on, winning that massive account or sorting out this wretched system that I've been complaining about for years or whatever it is. There'll be one thing that would make such a difference. Pick up the phone and have a conversation with that business I want to acquire, something like that. But there's always all these hundreds of little things to do.
Yeah.
And that's from that driver of Protestant work ethic. But we're knowledge workers, we're not manufacturing things.
Yeah. I think
anyway, I don't want to turn this into a therapy session for me, but I come from both the church and a religious family.
Right.
You don't talk to me about Protestant work ethic like my grandparents are practically, I can hear them.
That explains a lot of things. But yeah, so there's a book where you probably may have referred to it called The One Thing, which I can't remember the author from the top of my head. We'll put it in the podcast notes. And it's a brilliant book, and it's exactly that thing. She's saying, what's the one thing right now that will make everything else kind of irrelevant? What's the one thing? And that's so true, because I used to, when I used to have to-do lists, I would write something on that I did so that I could sort of tick it off, and that kind of mindset of, well, at least I can look at my to-do list at the end of the day and it's 50% done or 70% done or whatever it is. But anyway, going back to usefulness for some of the leaders that are listening to the podcast, Entrepreneurs Leaders, I think looking again at that, how do you get that sense of clarity? Because there's two things that we do, or that I've done, and I'm sure I know others have done as well, that become counterproductive. So first of all, you think I work harder than everybody else and I'll always be busy, and therefore everybody will see I'm busy and everybody will respect me for that. And then there's the Lone Ranger kind of thing. This, I had a coach many years ago used to call me Tex, Lone Ranger Tex. Whenever there's a problem, I'd try and come in and solve it, and then think, well, that helps my ego. And you think that everybody else will say, wow, how great you are. But actually, it's massively detrimental to both you and your team to keep doing that. Do you see that in corporates or in people that you work with?
Yeah. There's also the Captain Fantastics who often get promoted because they do all the right things. And then there's kind of, in our industry, big time, or in your industry. So they don't really want to be leaders, and they never work out, actually, I've got this team to manage and I haven't allowed any time at all to talk to them. They're just a nuisance. So they're a big problem. And often they shouldn't really manage. They don't want to. It's not the right stage in their lives for them, because they love everything else. So that's fine. They need to stay as functional leads, but not necessarily having people responsibilities. The other flaw is mother hen managers. Don't have to be mothers, but then they think, I don't want to delegate because my team is so busy anyway. So they're always saying, what can I do for you? And you think, well, yeah, actually you could write that proposal, or you could do that deck or something. So they end up doing things way below their pay grade. Yeah. So yeah, they're all personality flaws, and they're all definitely coachable. But if we're honest, most of us have had to work through a couple of them.
Yeah. Let's jump back and again, from your point of view, if you are thinking that you're overly busy, you're running the company, as we said, all the challenges we've already talked about in a fast and dynamic sector, and fundraising, investors, etc., how do you encourage people to create the time? Because it's always like we're time poor, right? But everybody has the same number of hours in a day, and some people are productive and some people aren't. So what are some of the key things as a leader with juggling multiple plates that you can do to create the time to step back and actually be better at leading rather than better at being busy?
Get a dog.
One of the guys that works for me swears by his dog. Is David. His sanity and his productivity comes from walking his dog twice a day. Yeah.
There you go. That's it. There you go. That's it for free. Well, I think Nietzsche said, sounding high-powered here, David. I think Nietzsche said the walking, or something about your best thinking will come when you do a walk.
Yeah.
But get out. We're not built to sit in front of a screen all day. Our brains are hardwired to do tasks that probably take about 5 minutes or less in front of them. So go somewhere different. So it's all about flow, isn't it? So it's finding time where your brain is not used to switching from one task to another. You can actually go and think. And I do think going for a walk and putting the energy back in is not, that's not indulgent or something we've got to feel guilty about. I think that's something really important that leaders should say to people. Instead of this FYI call about health and safety policy or something I've got you on at lunchtime, I've recorded it. Stick it in your headphones and go and listen. Go for a walk for 20 minutes at lunchtime. Listen. It won't be 20 minutes, it'd be 5 minutes. But if it was a meeting, it would probably be an hour and 20 minutes. So I think that's really important. And the holy grail of productivity is flow, deep thinking, real when you've lost all sense of appetite and ego, and you're deeply concentrating on your task. Because we're knowledge workers, we're paid to think. but the office culture, particularly when people are working in offices together, are not set up to help us think. So that's my thing. Get a dog. Failing that, take your laptop and go and sit in a cafe and actually do some deep thinking. Know what your problem is and go specifically to think about it.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is when you go for a walk, your subconscious brain is still mulling through problems, isn't it? Or swimming or running or whatever.
A lot of evidence that most people's best thinking comes when they're not thinking,
Absolutely.
whether it's the shower or walking the dog or whatever.
Yeah.
I think actually walking, I've started a lot more walking meetings, and Steve Jobs was a big fan of walking meetings, and I found them really productive. I had one the other week with one of my, we're both walking at the same time rather than on headphones, and I think we ended up walking about 7 kilometers, but also had a really productive time without distraction.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing about distraction, I think, is the biggest. Everyone talks about social media, and that is an issue, of course, as well. But just generally allowing ourselves to be continually interrupted, which takes us away from that flow state, and that's the thing that I encourage and try for myself, and also for the teams and founders that I work with, is buying by hook or by crook time away, and not burdening yourself or beating yourself up about not being available. Because sometimes the best thing for you, and indeed for the other side of the coin, is people are much more productive if you give them the autonomy and the skills and all that kind of stuff. But let them work it out for themselves. There's an innate, I think, need for people to particularly if they have a leader that they like or respect, to always seek validation, whereas really just get on with it.
Yeah, you said it. And there's also all sorts of research, isn't there, that we think we're multitasking, but all the time we're switching. So I like my clients to have blocked out flow time, and that any research says that if we can do up to 2 hours a day in flow, personally, I can't manage that, even if I'm writing a book. Well, sometimes I can, but up to 2 hours a day working in flow makes people 5 times more productive. They report being much more successful. They work shorter hours. They earn more money, etc., etc. So by whatever you're measuring, it's all about some opportunities to deep think. But then the rest of the time, we are switch tasking. Yeah. So we do something, we get a notification, we've got a ping, someone says, have you got 5 minutes? And then it takes us time to drop into where we are. So we're switching from one task to another. And what we know is that people are getting their work done, but they're working longer and longer hours, and they've got a kind of rumbling level of anxiety all the time. Yeah. So it's discipline, isn't it? Through discipline comes freedom. So we have to have structured flow time, structured planning time. You as a leader need to say to somebody, I don't want you sending me emails at 8:00 at night. That's not right. Because actually, when you read that email at 9:00 the next morning, I bet you wish you hadn't sent it anyway. Mm-hmm. You can do it once and do it well. And have some discipline and rigor about all those things. But I sometimes think nice leaders are actually frightened to say, let's go back to basics here. Again, back to values. We're talking about kindness, say, that's often in there. Well, it's not kind to send me an email on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm. Or to yourself to send it.
You don't need to do that.
Yeah. I think that element of trust is the real thing I drive home with the people that I work with, clients you work with, is that sense of trust. Because I often get the question, how do you remote team? What if they're, doing other things, etc. Well, I think if you've got the right people on the bus and they're very clear on what's expected of them, and they've got the tools to do what you're expecting of them, I don't care if they spend it, to take it back to recruitment, in my early days of recruitment, which, as you know, was boiler house stuff. You had to, on your desk and 100 phone calls a day and all that kind of stuff. And I was just good. And often days I'd hit my target after about 3 hours, and I'd start to just swan around, like a bit of an idiot with an ego, swan around the office, and you got back and you get back, you've got to make your 100 calls or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, well, why? You've asked me to do something and I've overachieved it. And, a little bit juvenile because I was only early 20s at the time. But the thought is that I don't care how long people take to get tasks done, as long as it's not too long for themselves or for us. But that trust, I think, is really hard to come by in business, that says, here's your job, here's the tools, here's the resources, we're here for you, but do it. And if you do it at 7 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock at night, I don't care. If you walk the dog 20 times a day, I don't care. If you know, whatever is, it's interesting. I worked with a client years ago called Skeleton Technology, which people will know who do ultracapacitors. And on their wall in their office was just the two themes, one of which was just get shit done. And one of their key things when they're hiring people is we don't care where you work from. This is pre-COVID, by the way. This is we don't care if you're in your bed, in your pajamas, on your toilet, in the coffee shop, you know, wherever you are. We don't care. Just, you know what you got to do. Just do it.
JFDI. Yeah. Well, I think there's two pillars. So if I'm working with an organization, or a leadership team, we look at two pillars. First of all, pillars. God, that's such a cliche, isn't it? Pillars.
Very corporate.
Journey, cascade. Let's play bingo here. But the first one is clarity. Right back to what you're saying. Is there a North Star? Are there values? Is everybody clear on the output that's expected of them? And so when I find that people are crazy busy, that's the first thing. Have you got a really good job spec? Oh, no. Well, I haven't. My team have, but I'm too senior. Right. Okay. That's the problem. That is the problem. That's the 101.
Yeah.
So you've got to have clarity of the organization and clarity of the expected contributions within that. And then the second pillar is competency. Is that you have to be confident that you've got the right people in the right seats and they've got the skills to do the job. Once you've got that, then your job as a leader is to facilitate their thinking and all the time say, what can we do even better to get more market share or delight our customers? Or what are we missing?
Yeah.
What are our blind spots? You know, how can we improve? How can we do this quicker next time? What can we do to make your life easier and the client's life better? I mean, your job is to have that thinking time to come up with the great questions, but you have to get those two things right. And of course, those two things will keep changing because it's an exciting world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you look at the institutional factors that create what we call productivity drag. So have we got systems that don't work, that are slowing people down? Do we have excessive collaboration? So we've got 20 people around the room talking about something that actually wasn't worthy of a discussion and also should have had 3 people in there with the same agenda. So it's tightening up on all those things. You know, are we slick enough in the communications and the way we work? Do we have too many collaboration tools? If Team wasn't invented, I'd probably be out of a job because people spend so much time on unnecessary communication that the actual real questions and the real messages are getting lost, etc. So that's it. You have the pillars of competency, clarity, and then you get rid of those institutional, organizational drag factors that get in the way of getting things done. And then Bob's your uncle.
Meetings for meetings. It's not that difficult. That's the whole thing that I try and get across. And life and business isn't actually complicated, but we like to overcomplicate things so often. Look.
Well, can I just say, I mean, I think there are whole layers in organizations, probably better not to name them now here, but I think there are some whole functions that you think your life is just, you know, I'm not taking this personally, but I seem to think your life is here just to make things complicated. I mean, we set up this podcast, didn't we, with a few texts, quick call, that was it. I do this with other people and we have a podcast about the podcast practically. I mean, there are some people, again, it's crazy busyness because they're not really sure on what they're supposed to do.
What else you got to be doing? No, it's very true. Listen, we could and should write a book, Zena. I'm conscious of time. I've taken a lot of your time. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and ideas, and we'll share on the podcast notes links to your books and also some of the other topic areas that we've talked about. And it's been great to have a slightly different conversation, but really get into the nuts and bolts of how to be and create successful clean tech businesses, because that's what is going to get us all to the place that we want to be in. And thanks for sharing your thoughts from perhaps outside of the sector, but all so critical to just creating successful businesses and teams. So thank you very much. Obviously, if you do want to reach out to Zena, you'll find her again. We'll share the links on the episode page. But for now, Zena and audience, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you hopefully next week from Prague.